what we'll do is just like a short sit, like 5 minutes, nothing crazy. And hmm, okay, I'll say something briefly, and then we'll do the short sit. There was a teaching recently which I really liked. One of my lamas. I'm just not going to name him, but a teacher I study with. He what he said is he said, often with things like vipassana or vipassana in Pali, we often associate it with meditation. And he said vipassana is also things like prayer flags, reciting sutras, making offerings, going around stupas, a lot of the things the FPMT also encourages and Lama Zopa Rinpoche also encouraged. And it had me thinking, I mean, this is something that I've known over the years, but it had me thinking sort of sometimes our idea of meditation is sort of, I don't know how to say it. Mm, is it aligned with goals of liberation or not? And this is sort of like, not that that's like a black and white thing, or not that that's nobody needs to police that for you. That's for, all of you to decide that for yourself. But I thought kind of a fun meditation could be just sort of like do something in your experience to connect with insight, right? And usually for me, and I'll give some parameters for this so it's not too open. So this means leaving your eyes open. You don't sit in a meditation posture. Please don't. Just like do whatever you want. Stand up, sit normally, move around. It doesn't matter, right? It's just going to be 5 minutes. And keep your eyes open, keep your ears open. And how to say it? Like here we can just sort of like seed our insight in this case just going to be insight practice. Let's just call it practice. We can seed it with a question of sort of like, mm, you know, what am I right now? And this sounds like kind of like a deep question, right? But it's not really. What am I right now? And I'm not going to give you an answer. I'm not going to say anything more. Just the question, and we're not answering the question. So it's a prompt. It's what I call an open question or a point of curiosity. It's not, if you want to do some analytical meditation, it's fine if you know how to do that. But it's more like a prompt to look at your experience. So, right. So if that question doesn't fit you, you can come up with another one. But the idea is like, what am I right now? We keep our eyes open. We can move around. We can do this. Connect to your experience. Use your awareness. Use the capacity of the mind that knows and can be aware just to observe your experience, but don't meditate. Don't make it something special. Is that okay? So we'll just do that together. The prompt, if you need a prompt, is sort of like, what am I right now? And personally, I don't care what you are, what you are not, right? So there's no like right answer to that. So let's do it. So we'll just ring the proverbial gong. We'll just do that for 5 minutes, just sitting together. What am I right now? And just noticing that. If you can help it, don't answer the question. Just be with the question. So if you're knitting before you can continue to knit, it's like kind of nothing special. Just sitting is fine. But look at your mind. Look at your experience. What is that experience? What are you within that experience? Drinking, moving, knitting, smelling, tasting. If you're brave, you can pick up your cell phone. I don't know. I don't think I'm brave enough for that. Okay. So we'll just keep it short on purpose. It's actually quite a difficult practice. Mhm. So we'll keep it short on purpose. Um, with that said, I want to hear from you what happened. But before that, we'll just sort of generate bodhicitta together. If you don't know what bodhicitta is, more or less generate compassion for your experience and a wish and aspiration for some opening towards that, some ability to see its nature, moving towards more and more openness and freedom for the benefit of not just oneself, but all sentient beings. Just click into that for a second. If you're totally not familiar with that, just a sense of care. I'm here because I care for myself and others. Okay, thanks. I don't know. Do you guys do opening chants or anything, or it's more informal tonight? Yeah.
Tonight is more informal, but if you would prefer, I can find some prayers for us, whatever works
No,
for you.
I think already we're in the flavor of informal, so it's better. But of course, if you have a practice of refuge and bodhicitta, you can do that internally. Um, as I said earlier, whoever can is really welcome to turn on their video. I appreciate it, just so I can see you more to stay engaged. But if you can't, as I already said, just some of you joined when I said that the last time. If you can't, it's totally fine. But if you can, I don't care if your hair is done or not. Um, I don't even care if you're in your pajamas. I don't care if you're knitting or eating or whatever you want to do. Right. So this is kind of actually, it's kind of nice. Sometimes in Dharma communities, we can get a little too like rigid about, uptight about like what is sort of okay conduct. And so we can look like good practitioners sitting there still, maybe even closing our eyes like we're blissed out. But our mind is thinking about pizza. So part of the exercise I was just sort of introducing is, just something off the top of my head, but also really getting to the heart. Maybe these next nights, I'll join you Tuesday nights. Getting to the heart of like what of Dharma practice, and I like to do that a little bit more experientially. And there's not like one meaning of that. Obviously, there's many ways to do that. But I think in the spirit of Lama Yeshe, this is called becoming your own therapist, right? It is based on the title of one of his edited talks into a book. And I think, that was one of the first Dharma books I read like 25 years ago, 20, no, like 26 or 27 years ago. Um, just while I was getting ready for this, I was thinking, oh, I probably should have looked through it again. Just like, remember, not that it applies. I know we can do whatever we want tonight, but it just kind of struck me, oh, maybe I should look through that and see it. But if I'm correct, I do remember one thing is sort of like Lama Yeshe tends to always focus on experiential, like how is your mind, how to experience that, how to develop a more what I call intimacy with your mind, right? So I think we can kind of use that as a loose theme to keep it more experiential. But of course, if we want to talk about philosophy, we can do that. I'm pretty open. Um, with that said, my first question for you is how did that go? Just that short practice of not altering, not trying to deliberately meditate, but watching experience of what am I? And yeah, please. Zila, is it Zela or Zila? Just refresh me.
It's Shella or
Shela.
Shayla.
Okay,
Yeah.
Shela.
Um,
Yeah, the X in Spanish, I always get confused when I take it back to English.
well, but it's Mayan, so and that
Oh,
shows the
okay.
SH on it. So yeah, my family's from
There, I was
Guatemala.
double wrong.
So
I was double wrong.
nobody ever gets it right. So the thing about that little mini meditation or was I kept throwing these labels out. And I just it was like grandma and I'm a this and I'm a that and I'm a this and then I'm like, wait, why am I limiting myself? Why am I just putting myself in these little boxes when I could be so much more and I am so much more than those little mini labels. So that's what.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, that's really actually an important point. I don't want to say too much. Maybe we can come back to that, but that's great. So just labels, like labels came to you, yeah? Uh, Karen, if you.
Yeah, so Shayla, I had a similar experience, but I was going through all the things that I realized, no, I'm answering the wrong question. You asked me, what am I? And I was answering, who am I? And that's
Sure, that's
for
okay.
me all the labels for. And then I'm because I'm working on Corona's book, and he's talking about the six myths and how to get rid of them. And the second one is all about the I and the self. And
Mm.
it's like that's I'm back in it's very me, the self is really concrete. And that's so I was like, okay, pick up the needles and just be the knitting. So
Cool. Wonderful. Thank you both for just being really, really, it's great to have people eager to share. So please keep sharing. I just want to give anyone else, it doesn't have to be like anything profound, could be just like a short, like these two answered. Anyone want to kind of mute yourself and talk, or you can share in the chat if you want.
Roll in here. Okay.
Hey there.
So oops. So when I looked at it, I was thinking, I mean, we've been up since 5 o'clock, so it's just been like go, go. And so I was thinking, when you asked the question, the first thing that came to my mind was not present. Like, what am I not present? Because I wasn't. And then I had to be like, okay, maybe I should just reel it in and kind of let everything else go and be here in the now. So then I just went into trying to be present.
Wonderful. Okay, so the prompt itself tells you to kind of connect with presence.
Mhm.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's good to see you. Your background is beautiful too. Sarnath, no, something like that. Oh, I think you're muted.
Barbador, we're actually in Bali, so we keep the camera.
Oh, cool.
Our bandwidth is not good, so it will start freezing if we keep going. But
Uh,
we'll try to turn it on when we're answering questions or sharing. Barbador, we're actually in Bali, so we keep the camera.
oh, cool.
Our bandwidth is not good, so it will start freezing if we keep going. But
Uh,
we'll try to turn it on when we're answering questions or sharing.
well, thanks for joining all the way from Bali. Yeah, I imagine it's very early. Yeah, very early there, right? You said it's early. Yeah.
No,
All right. So maybe we'll just keep coming back to that. I think one of the things I am enjoying a lot these days about my practice. I think one of the kind of things about Dharma that is for me kind of vital for keeping it alive and mm, I know I'm just going to share some personal things. If they relate to you and help, great. If they don't, great. No offense taken on my end. Um, when I've gone through so many phases of my relationship to Dharma and Buddha Dharma over the last 26 plus years of study and practice, and a lot it continues to change, and I'm really excited about that. Like I'm open to it changing, and yet there's something that, of course, there's a consistency of daily practice. There's things I do every day. My practice does grow in the sense that like I add things to it. So I have a form, I have a system, I have a format for it, which I highly recommend. And then there's just sort of the unformatted of when we fall in love with Dharma, and which can be very, very hard at points, as I think most of you know. But when we fall in love with practicing it, um, my sense is it becomes more and more about becoming an explorer of my experience than believing in anything in particular, right? And so I'll kind of break that open what I mean by that. Um, when I'm becoming or practicing being an explorer of my experience, there's several things involved in that. Of course, it's being influenced by all of my understanding of life and what it means to be human and mind, and of course Buddhism influences that a lot, right? um, but there's a quality we develop eventually in meditation where we sort of drop all the theory, we drop all the ideas, we drop what we should be doing and or what we think we should be getting, and we really practice the core of meditation, which is awareness. And when we practice the core of meditation, which is awareness, and we strengthen that to a certain degree, then we can have the ability to look at our experience more objectively, right? Not completely objectively. There's still a sense of self there. There's still a sense of identity, etc. Um, And I'll come back to the meditation and what you all shared. I'm just sort of going in a roundabout way here. And so for me, that freedom, that sort of, it's not quite excitement. It's more like it's not quite enjoyment. I don't know if I'd call it enjoyable. I think I would call it just sort of inspiring. It's something that inspires me to keep practicing, which is looking at my mind. And most of the time, my mind is crazy. It's not very how do you say it? It's not very uh enjoyable. It's full of delusion. It's full of a lot of anger and attachment, aversion, etc. Um, and at the same time, there's a willingness to explore that at some point. And this is what I've come to know as the wing of compassion in Buddhism. And compassion can mean a lot of different things, right? We can apply it as a specific practice, as a set of practices. The fruition of compassion is like something I don't even think we definitely couldn't put into words. And it's something way beyond what we think compassion would be. But I think, when we're talking about really getting experiential with our Dharma practice, we're talking about exploring our experience and being willing to do that from a place of compassion. So often that needs to come first, right? I mean, there's different ways to organize the path, but often in a graduated path, the path is actually organized where compassion comes before wisdom. Sometimes they can organize it where wisdom comes before compassion. It doesn't really matter. Actually, it depends on the person. But what I find in this area is if there's going to be wisdom or insight that's going to come via watching my experience with awareness. It could be meditative awareness, could just be awareness throughout the day. Um, Definitely compassion is required because as I just said, most of the stuff I see in my experience sucks. It's just not nice. And even if it's something that I see or experience that I think is someone else's, whether that's a war going on across the world or someone else's kind of suffering or sadness, it's, I'm not experiencing theirs. I'm experiencing my experience of their experience. You see what I'm saying? I mean, and so it still requires compassion towards the experience. And maybe I should define compassion here. There's many definitions of it, as we know. Like probably you all know one of the traditional definitions. The aspiration or wish for oneself and others to be free from suffering in all its iterations. But I think in an experiential way, what does that mean? I think the words are actually kind of vague there. For aspiration, they're fine. Like when we're aspiring to something, that's fine. But when we're actually putting it into practice, I find it to be much more closer to like a deep intimacy and connection with what I sometimes term the suck, and I don't mean to be crude with that, but I just call it, the suffering, the dissatisfaction, the stress, whatever you want to call it. The Buddha called it dukkha, right? So dukkha really covers all of it, and so for me, compassion more and more has been a gateway to lean into experience, of course, sometimes more than others, and I'm able to do that sometimes with simple discomforts, and sometimes I'm not able to do that because things are just overwhelming. So that's not a judgment of me or you or anyone. We're all at different stages with that. But Buddhist practice, or the practice of the Dharma, when it comes to compassion, it's just the effort of trying. And I always recommend take the least risky thing first, right? So for me, I'm like the dishwasher in my household. My partner doesn't like to wash dishes. My daughter's only 3.5, so she's definitely not washing dishes at this point. So I sort of defaults to me, and I notice frustration. Sometimes I'm fine with it. I'm neutral towards it, but sometimes there's frustration. And so that's like a kind of discomfort I can lean into, the frustration of having to get through the dishes or whatever. And then, of course, there's some other discomfort in my life that's much more physical pain is difficult for me. I think that's difficult for a lot of people. But either way, the recommendation here is when we're becoming explorers of our mind. This is why I want to say this first, because if I don't say this, it can get really conceptual. Um, my sense of it, my sort of practice, for the last somewhat years has been a lot of that, a lot of okay, in order to explore the mind, I also need the compassion to be with the suck, to be with the dukkha, to be with whatever's arising in any moment. And then when we have a question like, what am I? When we ask that, it becomes deeply in touch with what we're experiencing in the moment, because there's a lot of gateways towards experience, right? There's in the Abhidharma, we can name a lot, but just to simplify it, um, we basically, I mean, we could organize it into five aggregates, but again, I don't want to go there. We basically have, the different consciousnesses, right? Like the first five sense consciousnesses, and just to break that down for if someone's new to that here, we have our sense feeling, like touch, right? We have taste, we have sight, smell, and hearing, right? And those are in Abhidharma and Buddhist science. Those are consciousnesses. There's like sort of a raw consciousness that experiences that before the overlay of mind. The sixth consciousness comes, judging and pulling from karma and habitual pattern. So there's actually like an opportunity if sometimes if we can just be with those raw moments without the label, right? We can learn a lot about our sense of smell, etc. But usually the sixth consciousness comes in pretty quickly, not because we asked it to, just because it's there, right? And it's actually not a problem, the sixth consciousness. But there are things that are problematic within it which distort our experience of reality, right? That's what we're also talking about here. But either way, when I mean sort of when we're exploring this question, like what am I in an experiential way, we can look at any of those sense consciousnesses. We can look at at what we're feeling in the moment through touch, what we're smelling through smell, right? What we're hearing through our ears, etc. What we're seeing. That's why I said don't close your eyes, don't make it a meditation, just sort of keep things open. And then, of course, other than that, we have our sixth consciousness, which is mind, right? And this is, more or less why I think, we're doing this thing is, to understand mind, to understand how to use it wisely, to understand, I think one of the principal Buddhist, questions in Buddhism is what is the qualities of a mind that's bound and what are the qualities of a mind that's freed, right? So just simplifying the whole thing is sort of like, how is the mind when it's bound and how is it when it's free? Now, how do you say it? The second one, how is it when it's free? Most of us don't really know that, right? I mean, we can read about it. We can read stories of the Buddha, of, Machik Lodron and Yeshe Tsogyal and Guru Rinpoche and, Milarepa. We can read all these wonderful stories to understand how they described it in words. But of course, a freed mind can't be described in words. That's one of the first teachings of the Buddha. He wasn't able to really say it in words quite directly. But either way, because of that, because the freed mind is difficult to put our finger on and to say, okay, yes, I have some experience with that, we start with the mind that's bound, right? Like that's and you can see. I often say like the first noble truth. You can see it in the first noble truth. But for me, the first noble truth is sort of the first and only teaching of the Buddha. Like the more we study the Dharma, the more we start to see everything was actually in the first noble truth, right? If you really go deep into that, the path is also there too, actually. But he eventually made it more explicit through the other noble truths and then all 84,000 dharmas. But either way, the first noble truth, the noble truth of dukkha, right? This is that prompt. I think of it as a prompt. I don't think of it as a belief. I don't think of it as like an order. I don't even really think of it as, maybe it's advice, but it's like a prompt. Look at your bound experience, right? Because another way to talk about dukkha is to talk about bondage. Somewhere we're stuck that we're beholden to, that we don't know how to shift or get out of necessarily, right? There was a wonderful quote I'm going to do some teaching on soon. I'm kind of paraphrasing, but basically it was something like, most people think that they hold beliefs. And then and then he went on, he said, but actually beliefs are holding us. And I like that. That really changed it for me, right? Because part of the way we experience bondage is, of course, through the five aggregates. through these very consciousnesses that I was saying when we experience them in a dualistic way, but also through beliefs and ideas and identities we form around those, etc. But either way, I think that's the starting place for most of us. We look at the mind that's bound, at the experience that's bound. And that takes guts. And as I was saying, that also takes compassion. It's really hard. It's not easy. The more, I think this is one thing I'll share. And again, it might not be your experience. And so don't take this too seriously. I thought that like the more I practice Dharma, the easier things will get. And it's not that things get easier. I think it's just, we grow the strength to hold more actually. And then we see more of the illusion starts to show itself. And then of course, at some point, if we're able to connect with the wisdom path, we can start to cut through that illusion where we start to see the possibility of the freed mind, right? But what's tough is there's no other way to do it but to work with the bound mind to get to that point for most of us, right? Most of us have to work with, looking at that experience and working with it. So going back to kind of that practice we were doing, I think whatever we see is correct. That's why, Shella, right? Shella and Karen, what you all were sharing was very helpful because it's just your experience. And that's the point. It's like, can we be honest enough with ourselves to just see what we see? And then we continue to do that. So it's like an exercise that has no answer, It's not something we do and then, oh, I got it. Because, what the self is very slippery, right? And so we have to discover what it is through looking at our experience of it. And so, Sheva, what you were saying about the labels, I think that's like a very classical thing, right? Where we look at, we eventually start to see, oh, the way I experience self is mostly in labels of something, like I'm this, I'm that, and it's in relationship, right? So that's also something to pay attention to. It's never on its own. It's always in relationship, right? So Lama Yeshe often would point out when we're looking at ourselves in this way, what we eventually find is that there's some belief that's holding us, right? That there is an autonomous self somewhere. And it's not an idea kind of a belief. That we call the this is a technical term now, the co-emergent wisdom co-emergent ignorance or the simultaneously born ignorance, meaning as soon as we have the awareness, right, there is this sense or feeling or experience of an autonomous self that exists outside of relationship. But and ultimately, that's what we're questioning as is that real or not? Does that exist or not, right? And of course, from a middle way perspective in Buddhism, that's what binds us. That's ultimately what binds us. But still, what applies here is we need to look. Through looking at that, through experiencing that in all its different flavors, we start to see, oh, you're not real, Not that you aren't real or I'm not real. That part of our experience is not real, right? Right, because, I'm going into like very deep teaching though somehow, but, the essence, right, of Madhyamaka or middle way teachings really can be captured in these 4 lines in the Heart Sutra. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form, emptiness is not other than form, form is not other than emptiness. So, the first stage is like form is emptiness. We have to discover what am I? How are things existing? But I find sometimes if we bring in too much philosophical belief there or perspective, it muddies the whole thing up because the whole thing is about being an explorer. It's about being open and curious. And again, what's our main tool for that? Awareness that we cultivate in meditation, right? Generally. And that awareness becomes our best friend because that awareness doesn't have an edge. That awareness can also, how do you say it? It can hold everything. It can experience everything. It can, one of my teachers says it can become the host, right, of our experience, but it itself doesn't have to be the experience, right? So it can host even that sense of an autonomous self. It can host emptiness. It can host a lot of things. So that's that kind of that dive. But eventually, in emptiness's form, we start to see, how do you say it? Things arise, things appear, and in their sort of lack of findability, it doesn't mean things stop and cease. So it really opens up this question of like, who am I? What am I? because things don't just stop. They don't just sort of end. They continue. And as one of my teachers was pointing out today in a Dharma talk he was giving, it's sort of, at that point, what's bound, or he said it in a different way, but I'm just sort of going to use his teaching and then put it to my language here. Those parts of us where the mind is bound start to fall away. But before they fall away, they just become appearances. They just become things that are happening. Maybe just put it that way, right? And then the beliefs that cease, they don't cease, but they lighten their grip on holding us, right? So this is kind of like something I was thinking about today about myself. I was thinking about, I think I'm going to start measuring my Dharma practice, meaning like how successful am I being at my Dharma practice by how many beliefs I hold and how tightly. Like having a belief is fine, but it's more like how tightly am I holding them? This is like kind of one question. I don't know if that's accurate, but I was kind of thinking about that today. Okay, if like I'm not sort of holding things so tightly, that's maybe a good sign some days. And maybe if I am, that's something to look at and work with compassion. Anyways, just a little sidetrack. But anyways, what he was pointing at today is the more within awareness we see how things are more open, flexible, fluid. Obviously, we have form as emptiness. Emptiness form is a more philosophical way to put it. But as the more we experience that through looking at our bound mind, the more the bound mind resolves. Like the bound mind resolves itself, right? And then what comes is the appearances of our Buddha nature. So appearance never stops. It's not like then there's nothing. There's like a void. Like you've lost your samsaric mind, and then good luck, like enjoying your, I don't know, robot existence. Nobody said that ever. The Buddha didn't say that. No great master has said that. So what's left is the expressions of our Buddha nature, which also are not, true and inherently existent, of course. But either way, the expression starts to shift to what's more natural to the mind, and then we can experience the freed mind more. So, anyways, just to wrap it up and then kind of open it up to Q&A here, the this question of like how to work with who am I, what am I, we can do it in like really light ways. Like I was just doing it while we were talking. I was just sort of drinking water and just watching the experience of myself drink the water. It doesn't have to be some big philosophical question or idea, just kind of watching. So this is one of the simplest styles of Vipassana meditation. We just watch our experience. But of course, we need this quality of awareness to do that. That's the sort of watching, right, from the awareness. And I would say that's probably, I don't know, I said a lot of things, so I'm trying to track back what I was saying. That's probably been one of the single most helpful tools for not only continuing to explore myself in the Dharma, but also falling in love with the Dharma more and more. I think we all want juicy, kind of interesting practice, right? Nobody wants like a boring meditation practice. Do you want a boring meditation practice? And this is the thing. It's sort of like there's always this push and pull between like form and formless, meaning having a daily sitting practice where we're doing the same thing again and again is useful. I found that useful to a certain degree, right? And yet, if all our practice is just that, it can become very stagnant and runs the risk of being very stagnant, very rote. It can, be dogmatic sometimes, where we think we're a good practitioner just because we're showing up to the cushion every day and we're doing the right things. Oosh, please don't do that, But if we just throw out our daily practice and throw out what the tradition is recommending, that's not so good either, right? That's like an extreme, because then we're missing all the beautiful things that have been iterated and generally work. I think generally we haven't reached this time. I hope we never reach it, but we haven't reached this time in Buddhism in the world where people are forcing practices on people just to keep the, I don't know, the cultural and or presentation there, like maybe just like maybe the facade of what Buddhism is. I don't think we've reached that point where the lineages are sort of, they're forced to just keep the facade of this thing, the pride of the facade, and so they're saying do this, but it has no meaning and has no value. We haven't reached that point. I've never met, maybe there's people doing that. I don't know. Personally, any of the great masters I've had the pleasure and benefit to meet and study with, they don't do that, right? They give you what works. And I think that's powerful. But of course, it only works if you work it, right? It only works if we do it, if we work with it. And that's where I think why I wanted to emphasize this approach tonight. If we merge like more traditional practices with this everyday, all day practice of being an explorer of our experience, nothing's off limit. Nothing really sucks because we're open to it. It might be painful, but we're open to it with compassion. I want to wake up. So I'm willing to be with my experience. And of course, we can add bodhicitta to that. I'm willing to be with this suck for the benefit of all beings. But is that just some abstract idea? Or are we really being with our experience? That I think is where bodhicitta meets the road. Of course, it means being with others and helping them. But I think a lot of the practice, until we've moved along quite a bit on the boomies, is more about our side of the street, more about working. But the beauty is we work on that while we're working with others. I don't know how to describe that. Maybe we can open it that on Q&A. So I think I'll end my kind of rant there, but but I hope this is helpful. Just sort of this blend of sort of how to become more experiential in our practice, some ideas on how to do that, and then it's not a baby bathwater thing. We're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but we're deepening because we're falling more in love with becoming, what Lama Yeshe, I think he used to call like an inner being, right? That's what he called a yogi or yogini, an inner being, someone who becomes like a scientist of their mind, essentially, an experience. So I'll stop there. We got about 20 minutes. If anything sparked you or you want to go deeper on, or it's a non sequitur, it's still welcome. So yeah, the floor is open. Yeah, please.
I just had a quick thing. I wanted to tell you, I love the suck. That is brilliant. That's so much more powerful than talking to people about suffering or thinking about that. It's like that dukkha sort of doesn't connect in the English language, or it doesn't connect for me. So I think that's just, I'm going to have to borrow that. So thank you. That's brilliant.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. There's a good friend who's a longtime retreatant in Shinny Land of Calm Abiding, which is in California, one of the FPMT retreat centers. Roger Monroe, he said, samsara sucks from all sides. And, and I really like that quote. Scarlett, I think you have something there. Please feel free to unmute yourself. Yeah.
Oh, hi. So, I'm in Venerable Gendang's class, his meditation class, and what you're talking about is something I've just had kind of an aha moment today, as I am listening to him talk about like the self and emptiness, and I think I felt a little scared because like I think after I listened to what he was saying and I went to do some more research, like he's saying, I am not within my aggregates and I am not outside, right? Like these things can't happen. And so I went and researched like what does it mean by I'm not my aggregates, right? And what are the five aggregates? So then I understood that. And then I tried to understand like what it meant being outside. And then I think I had an idea. And so something I read along the ways that just kind of clicked. And I thought, oh wow, like I kind of get what he was trying to say is that like there isn't a solid self within me. It's a combination of like my aggregates coming together and things are just arising and falling. So then I want to ask you, because this feels really scary. So like, what is it? Is it the cognitive parts of my brain and then my mind coming together, making me make, you know, wise, skillful decisions. Like, what is it in me now that's not like who? My question is the who or the what that's making me have good conduct, right? Like a law-abiding citizen, taking care
Yeah.
of myself, making right decisions, skillful decisions for myself, not being in relationships I shouldn't be in. Like now that there isn't a solid I that I used to think, but it's just everything is just arising and falling, and these things are all happening based on our karma also. I'm a little shaken
Yeah.
like, as to who is it that's guiding me to make good decisions that I have been, I mean, making. Like I'm a law-abiding citizen. I follow the rules of society, la 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 la. Can you just kind of maybe speak to
Yeah.
so I can have something to take away and not feel so shaken?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I mean, whether we're just like studying emptiness and the teachings on emptiness, like conceptually, that's more what we're doing now. We're talking about it conceptually. Emptiness is not a concept, right? So we have to be clear with that. There's no emptiness that can happen conceptually. We're just pointing at the moon. And why is that useful? Because we're not pointing at a lake, we're pointing at the moon, you know? So it's just saying, like, okay, this is the general direction we want to go. But the thing, the moon, is not what we're talking. These words can't describe that, right? So we have to kind of recognize that too. But with that said, um, I think your question is wonderful, by the way. With that said, the
Well, I feel
conceptual.
shaken. I feel very shaken. As I was walking outside to do errands, I was very shaken as to who is, you know, not jaywalking and what's
Mhm.
stopping me from doing that. Or, like just yeah, what is inside of me if the self is just not solid but ever changing all the time?
That part of experiencing fear or being thrown off is normal. And actually, like, as long as you uh are able to ground yourself within that insight experience, whatever we want to call it, it's actually a good thing. The only way that would be a bad thing is if that ungrounds someone to the point where they then fall into nihilism more heavily. So that's the real danger here, right? So we'll get to that part in a second. But I wouldn't, and I'm saying this just to normalize your experience, and you don't have to be afraid of the fear. You know what I mean? It's like that's normal. That happens to most of us. There's often like two responses to insight into emptiness that are talked about in text. One response, I think, you know, most of us don't experience. It's very rare. Is to experience a sense of bliss because one is touching that freedom, and one is a bodhisattva who's trained in previous lives, and then there's an experience of wow, this is what freedom is, and they start to experience more bliss. Most people, practitioners, experience fear, right? Because why? Because this thing that's organized, just like you're asking, this thing that's organized their experience our whole life is being challenged, right? And so this is why going gradually and not suddenly is useful here in this sense, right? So your question is a little bit conceptual, but I just want to, which isn't a bad thing, but I just want to answer that too because it sounds like part of you has this fear, and then I think it's just working with that fear and having a practice of groundedness. I find somatic meditation practice to be very helpful here, meaning like practices where you're touching the feeling in the body and you're connecting with just a sense of groundedness or shamatha, right? Shamatha practice, just general calm abiding meditation. Maybe you can rely on that for a while, and that has you're not questioning the self there. There's a self that's meditating, right? And either way, it sounds like you're struggling a little bit more with sort of maybe what it triggered for you is a little bit of nihilism, right? And I'm not, and there's nothing wrong with it. Pretty much all of us are waffling between nihilism and materialism all day long, But when the nihilism gets a little bit stronger, that can be dangerous, right? So,
Yeah, I don't know what it was exactly that my mind was thinking. You're all of a sudden like
yeah,
there.
I lost my power. So my internet has a battery, but my lights went off. So I'm here. Yeah.
Okay. I just felt really scared. Like, because I just didn't know who is inside me that's organizing myself to be, y- you know, um, the vows that I've taken, that's maintaining that, all the things, like all the like moral, ethical ways of conduct, I started thinking, well, who's that? Like, who is that like, how is that happening? Is that happening because
Yeah.
I'm doing Vajrasattva and purifying? I don't know. I just felt a little shaken today, so I just don't know how to put myself back to.
Is there anything that in particular like grounds you practice wise?
Um, well, I guess I was questioning like is my brain helping my mind? I think I just felt ungrounded, and I just need to come back to um something that makes me feel, I don't know. I don't know how to put it. I don't know what to say, but
Yeah, well, no, that's what I'm asking. Like maybe reflect on like things that are very grounding for you, which don't have to be meditation. That could be like walking in nature or dancing or eating really nourishing food or certain music or, something in your life that's like that's not going to destabilize you,
right.
right? So that's what I'm suggesting. And in the meditation world, what I'm suggesting is somatic practices, but you could just working with the breath and just doing shamatha with the breath is very helpful for grounding for a lot of people. So that's what I'm suggesting is actually like don't go deeper into this inquiry at the moment. It's
Okay.
good. Sometimes it shakes things up, but it's not like you're not going to get like more out of it by shaking it up more necessarily, especially if like if you feel fear, right?
Yeah. Like we've
Um
been talking about this for a very, very long time, and it just kind of glazed over me until today. I had this,
yeah,
oh
well
my gosh.
that's good. That's good. Well, that's what I'm saying. Ultimately, I think it's good in the long run, but in the short term, like ground yourself, do something. The breath is very helpful because sometimes the fear hooks with the wind energy, what we call the lung in Tibetan. And
Right.
so when you work with like deep breathing, as an example, especially belly breathing, it
Okay.
brings the wind energy or lung down, right?
Okay.
So because sort of like what you're experiencing is good, but you don't want the energies to get imbalanced, essentially, right?
Okay.
So that'd be my take. And then as far as your conceptual question, I mean, that's a really deep one, what binds us to habit patterns. And the truth is sort of like interrupting a concept can be powerful. It can shake things in the way you're talking about, but that's not going to necessarily interrupt like the deeper, more intuitive self. That takes a lot of time and practice. And that is a non-conceptual experience, what we call, Lama Yeshe sometimes called it the intuitive self, or I sometimes call it the like primal sense of self. I already said the simultaneously born ego. That's another term we use from the Tibetan. That's not going to get interrupted anytime soon, most likely, unless you're like, a bodhisattva and you're just reliving your realization. I don't know. It could happen. I'm not saying that that's you. I'm not trying to, pump you up. But what I am saying is like most likely it's just like a conceptual shake, can create fear, which shows you the power of these practices.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
powerful, but it's like medicine. You have to be careful with it, right? It's like just because the medicine is powerful doesn't mean we should keep eating it. We take a dose and then we chill. Um, but with that said, I'm not too concerned like you're going to drop your good conduct because those are habit patterns built up that are healthy, right? And so because emptiness is not nothingness, right? We don't have to worry. The wisdom mind, once we have direct experience, the wisdom mind takes over and the conduct comes out of the wisdom mind itself. But until that point, we have to be careful and use our self, use our what we call the mirror eye, use our conceptual mind and the mirror eye to make good decisions and learn what's going to be more wholesome and less wholesome and just do that. And so emptiness doesn't mean like there's a lot of debates in Tibet and elsewhere in Buddhist cultures of like, right and wrong and sort of, how do you say it, good and bad and all these kinds of things. And ultimately, emptiness goes beyond good and bad. But that doesn't mean it equalizes good and bad while we're still in the dreamlike experience of samsara, right? There are healthier decisions we can make in our life, but those are relative. Like, for instance, Scarlett, like a decision you might make about, your, let's say, like eating styles at this point is very different than a woman would have had to make 100 years ago. And
Mhm.
and you see what I'm saying? So even what we find as like relatively better these days maybe didn't apply 100 years ago because we're in a completely different food situation with processed foods that never exist, things like that. You see what I'm saying? So that means it's relative, but doesn't negate that there's like a better decision in some things in in the interim, right? I think when I was talking about clinging to beliefs, it's more like just clinging to the idea that it's always going to be like that, right? But we have to go with something. So I think that's where like it's okay, like keep your vows, do make sure your conduct is in line with general dharma, but then how do you say it? We're not challenging that, we're more challenging this sense of who's experiencing that and how. But that can
Right.
come slowly over time. You see what I'm saying?
Yes. Yes. Thank you.
So yeah, you're welcome. But the fear thing is important. So just like do things that are nourishing and grounding for yourself, both in meditation and outside of meditation would be my suggestion. Yeah. But keep going. That's wonderful. I mean, that's a cool experience, like in the sense, like you said, oh, I just sort of like I'm
Yeah.
paraphrasing what you said, but you were listening a long time and never really hit, and then just a moment. So that we call merit generally. That means some merit popped up for you, right? And so the fear isn't a bad thing, just have to handle it in a good way.
Thank you so much. Thank you. He has been over and over telling us, like, and he is telling us about the same thing you're saying. Like, it doesn't mean nothingness or, things arise dependently, right? Like he keeps saying this to us, right? And I can't tell you how many times he keeps saying this to us. And then all of a sudden today, I just felt shook. But thank you for giving me some advice and some suggestions on how when I do feel that way, to still keep my conduct and everything intact. But when I do feel shook, to do the deep breathing and like do some grounding things. I like that. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, basically until we're beyond karma, and it's not like you have to guess that. Like when somebody realizes emptiness, they have no clinging and attachment anymore. So they stop causing karma. They're like at that point, then the conduct can become more nuanced. Let me put it that way. It doesn't mean they abandon dharmic conduct. They keep it for the benefit of others. But the point is, like until that point, we actually have to mind our karma and conduct and stuff like that. Because as one of my teachers puts it, you know, yes, from the ultimate perspective, whether it's a good or bad dream, it's still a dream, right? Like so, from the perspective of the absolute, good, bad, it's still a dream. It doesn't matter. But when we're in the dream and we believe the dream, it very much matters whether we're having a nightmare or not, right? So when we encourage beneficial conduct, and non-harm, etc., we're encouraging a good dream for ourselves, which of course all the great masters have seen helps us to move along the path, right? So I think it's a very delicate subject because eventually, um, how do you say it? Conduct becomes more natural, like again, as an expression of our Buddha nature. But until that point, we have to train ourselves essentially. Yeah. So good.
Wow. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So we make that aspiration. May I see my Buddha nature without bounds, and may my conduct naturally unfold to benefit others from my Buddha nature. We can make those aspirations, and
Yeah.
and then at the same time be honest with where we're at, right? And I think
Mhm.
that's helpful. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else? We got a few minutes.
I've got two comments, one of which
Sure.
is that I definitely experienced a lot of fear and still do to some extent, not a lot. The fear is lessening in terms of addressing emptiness. The thing that I do struggle with now is I realize I have an attachment of looking out and seeing things in a certain way that comes from um, I can remember being a little kitty and thinking, oh, everybody else seems to know what's going on here. I got to figure this out. So I took my lessons from them. I'm attached to the concepts that were passed on to me as a child, that this is the way the world works, this is how it is, this is the whole dynamic. So Yeah, so I don't know if you've got anything to say. How does one become less attached to, given there's a certain sentimentalness about it, if you know what I mean. Does that
Yeah.
make sense? And also, I had the privilege of being taught by some wonderful philosophers, and so obviously intellectual materialism was a big thing for them, of course. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, really good question. Wow, these are great questions, by the way. We could use like 2 more hours, but I'll just answer this and then we'll wrap up. And maybe this can be an ongoing one because this is kind of I'm just going to say something, but it's a deep one. So obviously, like similarly, this is I think all of you are you know good practitioners and scholars at this point to a certain degree. So you kind of know the breadth of Buddhism. Buddhism it's so many different methods and ways of working with our minds and resolving our samsaric dilemma, essentially, right? What I call like our predicament of samsara. So what I'm about to say is not to say it's like the only thing, obviously. It's just sort of the first thing that popped into my mind around that, and perhaps it could be useful for you. But with that said, there's so many other avenues. So if this doesn't suit you, or you're not ready for this, there's lots of other things, and perhaps I can think of other things too. Actually, I'm not going to talk about tantra here, but because I don't know if people have received empowerment. So in order to talk about tantra, generally people have to receive empowerment into the same mandala. But and you don't have to answer whether you have or not received empowerments, but this is where tantra thrives, right? And so tantra, actually, we have creation stage and completion stage, and that's a whole thing. But more, I was kind of thinking of creation stage, and this isn't like secret what I'm about to say, because you can read this in books. So I think it's okay if you haven't received empowerment. But one thing that's really particular to tantra is it interrupts our beliefs, and sort of like what you were saying is these strongly held beliefs, that you were indoctrinated into, essentially, that could be conceptual. But I also believe that things live in our body. They get sort of lodged into our subtle bodies and energy systems too, and that's not like a new age idea. That's also coming from Buddhist tantra. But so when we practice creation stage, which mainly is on the level of mind, mainly on the level of visualization, mantra, um, ritual, etc., what we're doing is we're opening up our world vision. We're training an enlightened worldview, enlightened perception, right? So we're bringing to fruition what is the Sambhogakaya, or the one of the bodies of Buddhas, one of the expressions of Buddhas. We're bringing it into our practice now in a conceptual way. But what it does is it starts to also break apart these kinds of beliefs in a less conceptual way. Because obviously we can meditate on emptiness, we can, do all kinds of stuff conceptually. But for instance, if we have empowerment into Tara as an example, and we're imagining ourselves and others as Tara, and we're in the pure land of Tara, it starts to it's like a enlightenment. One of my teachers calls it like enlightenment virus that starts like a good virus. It's like an enlightenment virus that starts to enter your system and transform you from the inside out, right? And that can be very helpful in these situations, especially depending on because it's like you were saying, it's very like intellectual stuff. Sometimes when we use the opposite, it's sort of like the right medicine. We can use the same poison against the poison. We can use intellectual, breaking down intellectualism, like, right, through analytical meditation. But some cases we can just do tantra. And this also helps to break it down in this other way where our whole being becomes the mandala as we practice, right? And this can start to change habit patterns as well. So yeah, I'll just say that. There's a lot to say around that, obviously, but that might be a way for you if you're open to empowerments, and that involves teacher-student, guru-student relationship and stuff like that. So whole other topic, but yeah. Is that something that makes some sense? Is Jai or
Jay, yeah, and yes,
Jay?
absolutely.
Good. Okay, cool. Well, thanks everyone. This was fun. I did not know what to expect, and as I said, I'm excited. I could keep going, but to honor the time, it's 8 o'clock now Mountain Time. We'll continue on, and so you know, bring, also maybe next time too, we can continue on these topics, but if you have things in your practice you want to talk about too, I'll try to remember in the beginning. We can open it up with that as well. So it can be really related to like what's on the ground for you right now. But it sounds like you all just dug into that anyways. So I appreciate it.
Many
Yeah.
thanks.
Thank you
Thank you,
so
Scott.
much. Great
Thank you
class.
so much, Scott.
Thank you. Thank you so much.